Welcome back to the WMM podcast, where women in sport take the mic and no topic is off limits. Powered by Black Sheep, we're here to chat about cycling, sport, health, and all the messy bits in between. I'm Georgie.
And I'm Sheridan. And today we're joined by someone who's helping female athletes feel like they mean it, advanced sports dietitian Dr. Gemma Sampson. Based between Sydney and Girona, Gemma has over 12 years' experience working with both amateur and elite cyclists. Through her Fueled framework, she's empowering women to shift from restriction to performance, helping them optimize energy, recovery, and health on and off the bike.
So in this episode, sorry for the listeners, I have a visitor, a little pooch. In this episode, we're diving into big stuff, the most common nutrition mistakes female cyclists are making, REDs, as we all know, and as well as how to fuel smarter before, after, and during your rides, whether you're a seasoned racer or not.
Before we dive in, just a quick heads up. Today's episode includes discussions of disordered eating and mental health. If these topics are triggering for you, please take care while listening, or you maybe give this one a miss. Today's ep is about ditching the diet culture, getting clear on what your body actually needs, and giving yourself permission to perform. Let's get into it.
So, Gemma, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be back. It's been a few months since I've been on this podcast.
Oh, yeah, you're one of the OG guests. And yes, the dog that has joined us this is Barbara. I'm looking after Barbara. She's 3 years old, fondly known as Babs.
Babs, look at Babs.
Yeah, she's about 4 kilos of nothing.
Cuteness.
She's like, I want to be in the WMN podcast, please.
Exactly, so she does. There she is. She's getting up on the thing.
Get the views up. Like just
Exactly, 100%.
Automatically, like, oh yeah, like.
Exactly right, puppy. So Gemma, but welcome back. So we're very happy to have you back on, and thank you to this new rendition of the WMM podcast. You've worked with everyone from everyday riders to elite pros. You're now based in Mallorca, Spain. Can you take us back to the very beginning? So like what drew you into sports nutrition? How did you end up specialising in cycling? And specifically, how did you end up specialising with female athletes?
Oh, lots of questions there. So I think
sorry.
I was always interested in sport, and I think when I studied dietetics and nutrition and dietetics, I think I always wanted to specialize in sports nutrition back then. But this is like when did I graduate? 2008, but then people were like, yeah, but like it's not really a career. You can't really do it full time. It's like a hobby. It's not really a job. And so I kind of had it there as an interest and parked it. I've always been very sporty. I swam when I was a kid, and then I think about 10 years ago, I've been working for best part of 10 years and sort of realized I'm like, okay, I've worked in all these different fields. I've worked in oncology, I've worked in malnutrition, I've worked in eating disorders, I've worked in a whole bunch of different things. Sport is what I'm really passionate about, and I think it was partly driven by, I think, the passion for getting back into cycling. I was in the UK, I was riding to work a lot, so I was probably doing 10-15 kilometers to and from riding for work. So my fitness and health, like fitness from a cycling perspective for fun, was sort of growing. Went through a major breakup, and as you do, you start doing like, okay, what do I want from my life, and reassessing things. Who am I? What am I doing? And realize like, no, sport is something that I'm passionate about. I do want to focus on it. I was retrained as a sports dietitian, sort of accidentally fell into a master's degree in sports nutrition, then my PhD and my doctorate in sports while I was living in Liverpool. And amongst that, I was doing triathlon. So I went straight into triathlon, and I did 2 years of triathlon. First year did the Sprint Olympic half Ironman. Second year I did a couple of halves and full Ironman, and finished the Ironman I think like 3 days before I went doing my masters. And there was a lot of things that sort of started seeing then.
You told me that like I asked a lot of questions, but you just threw a whole lot at us. My goodness, Gemma.
How do I keep
How
up?
did you get into cycling?
It's an amazing background, and I just want to touch on something very briefly. So you said that you did your Masters of Sports Dietetics in Liverpool.
Yeah.
Was that at Liverpool John Moores?
Yes. So
Yes.
I was at Liverpool John Moores, and so I know we've talked about the research that you've done before, and Jose was my supervisor for my doctorate initially.
Yeah.
And that was a funny story how we met as well, because I was at a coffee shop, and I had a Morton drink bottle on my desk, and then the conversation's like, oh, what do you think of that? And then it turned out that he was this new lecture that was starting, and it kind of all evolved from that he ended up becoming my primary supervisor.
For the listeners, Gemma and I have discussed this on her podcast, actually, a research study that I think we've mentioned on this pod before, that I was able to be the guinea pig for at the 2023 Tour de France Femme avec Zwift, which was headed by Dr. Jose Areta, who is a lecturer at Liverpool John Moores University, who was the supervisor for Gemma's masters. Is that right?
No, my doctorate,
My doctorate.
professional
Yeah,
sort
your
of medical
doctorate.
doctorate.
Yeah. So very small world, but he is the rock star in energy availability, particularly for females in sports. So very, very fun little Venn diagram there.
Yeah, I was going to say it's all very connected, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, I used to live in. So I lived in the UK for 7 years before I moved to Girona. So I moved to Girona end of 2017, I think, and I actually moved to Girona and when I started my doctorate at the same time. So I'd finished my masters and then moved to Girona shortly after that.
Yeah. Okay. So you've been in Europe since then.
Yeah, so I've actually been in Europe since 2010. So I left.
Okay.
I worked as a dietitian in Australia for a year, and then I moved to England for what I thought was going to be a year, and it turned out to be 7. And then moved to Girona. So I've been in Spain on and off, best part of 8 years now, 8-9 years.
So I've got a question because we'll go into the work you do with professional cyclists and dealing with Eurocentric teams, etc. But personally, as both of us, all of us are Australian, and I have been told that Australia is kind of the nexus for sports science and research in this area. How do you find working, like having the knowledge of what we're doing here in Australia? I mean, the UK is also exceptionally good. Liverpool John Moores is one of the biggest think tanks in the world in this area. And then working in Europe and like battling some of the lived, I'm using this term a lot in this podcast, but the legacy beliefs that are ingrained in that culture over there, particularly when it comes to a sport like cycling.
Yeah, I think it is interesting, and I think a lot of time roles and jobs, it comes out of being in the right place at the right time. So like, I think with any career, whether it's sport, it's music, it's creative, there's talent, and there's sometimes it's just being in the right place at the right time, or taking the leap of faith. Because I mean, I remember when I first moved to Girona from the UK, like I wasn't happy in the UK, and I mean I had a practice, I was seeing athletes and seeing clients, but personally I wasn't happy, more just because I don't cope well with the cold at all. And so then when I moved to Spain, I think there was a lot of people like, oh, that's really risky, what are you gonna do? And I'm like, I'm a sports dietitian, I work with endurance athletes, I'm moving to a town that is full of athletes, plus all the sport tourists that come through. There's no sports dietitians or nutritionists here. Like, it's an open, like, what have I got to lose? Like, what's the worst that can happen? I have to move back to Australia, I have to move back to England. I'm like, I will make it work. And yeah, I think it certainly wasn't easy, especially you throw the COVID into the mix of all of that sort of drama. But being in the right place at the right time, being close to athletes, like there's so many athletes that I know just purely from having been in that location and then meeting them and having conversations with them, and yeah, like providing advice that they can actually practically sort of use. But I think you talk about the legacy of the sport, culture is a battle. And I mean, I'm only just seeing now in the last 12 months changes that I think I've been advocating for in sport, in cycling, for best part of 10 years. Whereas 10 years ago, you'd be at the Giro or something, and then the chef would have made pizzas for the riders for dinner, and then one of the DSs comes up and will blatantly say like they can't eat that, they're going to get fat, and all this like sort of really negative culture around food that creates fear around food. And I think that's the stuff that I'm like, yeah, we can look at numbers and we can look at like eat this and eat this, but I think the hardest work for most people is changing the culture of fear around food and scarcity, and like food is bad, and that takes weeks, months, often years, sometimes decades to rewire in people and in the sport culture too.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by a lot that you just said there, and it's so many interesting things. But I just want to start with your framework that you advocate for, and then we'll go into the work that you've done. So you mentioned like the past 12 months, you're really only seeing that adoption more widely of the framework that you've advocated for the past decade, part of the last decade. Do you want to walk us through what that framework is?
Yeah, absolutely. So ultimately, there's a certain amount of food that we all need to is to be healthy and not just survive. And I think so many people I'll see is they're trying to eat as little as physically possible, and they focus on scarcity and like less, like little, and are often eating less than their body needs to survive and to function. And so we have a certain amount of food that our body needs to be alive, functioning, healthy. And then on top of that is the food that we need for training. And then if we're racing as well, that's a whole different kettle of fish as well. That what we want to do ideally in an ideal scenario is we test in training. We make the mistakes in training to figure out what works for you specifically as an individual, because we've got guidelines, we've got recommendations, but you could be on like, those recommendations are a range. and you could be somewhere within that range. You could be on the top end of the range, you could be on the bottom, you could be bang smack in the middle, but ultimately, like, it's unique to you where and what that looks like. And so we test it in training, we experiment, we make the mistakes of the before, the during, after. So then you get clear on race day of like, this is how I perform the best ultimately. And so I think that the key driver for my doctorate research was I was seeing all these athletes not fueling in training, and I'm like, well, what is going on? Like, this is the biggest performance enhancer. Like, and all these athletes, they'll spend thousands and thousands on wheels and kit and shoes and all this sort of stuff that might make them seconds quicker, supplements, like, oh, this is going to be the game changer. And I'm like, well, if you just ate something, like, you could be so much faster, and like, it could be like
marginal
minutes,
gains,
it could be hours. Yeah, I was like, marginal gains. Like, what about like massive gains? Like this.
Yeah.
Have a burger.
Yeah, I think it's like I've had this discussion with a few people around the concept of marginal gains, and it seems to have like, it took off like what, the mid 2010s really, around like Team Sky, and I think people really got hung up on those. It's like the altitude, the tire pressure, the aerodynamics, whereas in reality, the thing that's powering the bike is the most important thing.
Yeah, and I think obviously the 1%ers, they have a place, but they're like the sprinkles on the case. And what people miss most of the time is the fact that they're only relevant if you've dialed in everything else. And that's what most people forget and don't do. They haven't dialed in, like, whether it's nutrition, it's sleep, it's training quality, it's recovery. They've not, if that isn't dialed in, those supplements are going to do absolutely nothing for you if you're not getting the fuel to survive, to recover, and to sort of perform. And that's what I'll see a lot of the time, is that I'll be working with them and I'll start getting them to fuel more. And it usually takes, I know they can eat so much more than they're eating, but there's so much fear and resistance against, like, usually because there's this backlying like mindset of fear of like, but if I eat more, I'm going to gain weight. So usually the resistance is, I don't want to gain weight, so I don't want to eat. And this thought attachment that if I eat more, and carbs especially, equals gaining weight. And so I find that they fuel the training better, and then all of a sudden they're coping with better training load. They're not getting sick. They're not having to take time off train. All of a sudden their power is going up. They're getting results that they haven't seen in weeks, months, years, with the same training program and the same coach they've been working for years. And the coach is like, what's happened? Like, what's going on? And because they just all of a sudden just start leapfrogging in terms of their performance because they've got the fuel to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And personally, that was the biggest learning that I had on, like, in my experience. I mean, Gemma, you and I were in the initial phases of me realizing that I was in trouble. We discussed ways to kind of move forward, and kind of and think about and kind of because I think I remember saying to you, Gemma, I don't know how to eat properly.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what is proper eating. Like, I have been on a regime for the past 8 months, 12 months. What does actual natural intuitive eating look like?
Yeah, or even what is a normal meal size? Like, I think there is so much fear around food and this perception that like less is more. And I'll see people eating like at breakfast, for example, and they think 300 calories is a lot. I'm like, no, that's a snack. Like, that's like, of course you're hungry, and like, of course you're hungry an hour later and looking for something else, or they're using coffee as a replacement for energy. And it's like, okay, well, it might have the energy, but it's got no micronutrients. And then there's a point that things shut down. And so like with I think we talked a bit about that reds and stuff, like there's short term and there's long term sort of consequences, and I will often see the long-term consequences happening in real time, but the person in that moment, because they haven't had the stress fracture yet, they haven't had the crash that's picked up all the broken, like the poor bone structure and the osteoporosis in their 20s, essentially, like, because they haven't seen like enough of a reason to justify eating more. They're like, no, I'm fine, I'm okay, like, it's okay.
Yeah, because I've got a bit of like my notes page is completely messy now because I've just got so many thoughts I'm jotting down as you're talking. Because I think we've got this fear of food that is endemic within professional cycling, and I'm sure you see it across the men's and women's peloton. And then you're seeing people kind of like run headlong into a state of relative energy deficiency in sport, and there's like. But they've got this fear of food, also fear of job security. They've got this fear of like subpar performances and possibly an eating disorder on top of that.
Yeah.
like there must be a huge amount of compassionate care that you need to give that person, but it must be entirely frustrating for you to see that happening and not being able to change it.
It is really, really difficult because, as you say, like there's the job security scenario. So I'll have riders approach me, but they don't want their team to know because they're worried if the team knew, then they might get cut from the team, or they might not be selected to sort of race. So they're aware that something's not right. They want to fix it, but then they're scared about it. Then I've also had the athletes that I've worked with, they're fueling so much more. The stories I've got of like riders having their teams hide food from them because they're like the DS is like, oh, you're eating too much. Whereas we know that this person fuels and performs so well when they're having 120 grams, and the team has hidden bottles and hidden gels, and so they're having to go in self-sufficient just in case that. Yeah, I know.
That's actually ridiculous.
Mm.
Yeah. Like these are adults as well. Like it's so crazy. Like what a risk to people's like their health and also mentally. Like that's a mind fuck. Like it's like a form of torture. Like not letting someone eat.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where like so much. Most of the work that I'm doing with people is it's not about food. It's about the fear around food. It's the psychological, like the amount of additional training I've done in eating disorders and disordered eating, because the more that I've worked as a dietitian, I've realized it's the psychological thing that's holding most people back, and that's what takes time. Because like, sure, we can give you a meal plan, but I know that most of the time people don't follow it. And I've had riders who have an eating disorder, or they've been diagnosed with REDS, and then they've worked with a dietitian who's given them a meal plan that's 1,000, 2,000 calories more than they've habitually been eating, and it terrifies them. And like, of course it's going to terrify them because they see that like, I'm going to gain 10, their thought might be I'm going to gain 5-10 kilos with that. And so I find that working with people, like it'll be these small changes that seem insignificant on paper, but I've had people worried about adding a walnut to a salad because they're
Guilty.
A walnut
Guilty.
will add
Are you serious, Georgie?
Yeah, I used to think like if I had an extra walnut or if I had an extra YoPro, which is 90 calories, like the scales tomorrow would go up.
Yeah. And so Gemma, you just mentioned something interesting, which is eating disorders or disordered eating. And I'm really interested about that because, I mean, Georgie, if you had explained, like if you had said that to me when that was going on, I'd be like, holy shit, she has an eating disorder. But is that not, or is it disordered eating? Like, how do you differentiate the two?
And okay, it's interesting. It's a spectrum, and it's a spectrum that can change across the career or the lifespan of an athlete. And there's things. So someone, for example, like someone might be in a really, really good place. They're really, really healthy. They've got a good relationship with food. They crash, they break something, they got to take time off work, and that could be a stimulus for them to like go 10 steps backwards and create sort of fear and get worried about, paranoid about food. So like conversations I'll often have with riders is before, like uploading, for example, before a race. It's very, very valuable. With women, we have to eat more energy to get the benefit. Like the research that showed that it didn't work with women was giving them the same amount of carbs as they were having before because they based it on percentages. So with women, if we eat more energy, so we have to eat more carbs to get the amount that actually does give us the benefit for our glycogen stores. But it is very normal for weight to go up. Weight is in a number on the scale to go up 1, maybe 2 kilos because of the water that's attached with that glycogen, which as you're exercising that fuel, you lose it during. And so this is part of the testing and learning processes in training in like situations that aren't sort of stressful. But I've seen a couple of comments of athletes talk about this now where they've on a race day restricted because they got on the scale and it was heavy, and then they're worried that they're not going to perform, so then they don't eat, which then that is what's the stimulus for them not performing. And so a lot of the work I'm doing with people is the building up the confidence for them of like, okay, just because the number is high doesn't mean that you've gained a kilogram of fat, because that's what so much it is, that there's this thought that, oh, I've gained weight, I've gained fat. And it's like, no, it's not true, especially with women. Like our weight is so scatty. Like I haven't posted it yet, but last month in June, I started taking creatine, and I wanted to see what that did for me, if it changed my weight, because I see a lot of women, especially being worried that, but I'm going to gain 2 or 3 kilos. I don't want to take it. And to see, okay, is there a change? And I know my habitual sort of patterns around weight, like it sort of fluctuates 1 to 2 kilos at the month. There's certain weeks in the month that are higher, and then there's certain weeks that are lower. And I mean, for me, it's jumping up and down, but if people don't know that, then they wake up today, it's like, I'm a kilo heavier than I was yesterday. I've gained that belief or thought is I've gained a kilogram of fat. Like, no, that's water. Like those water, or it could be fuel.
And I think this is an interesting phenomenon, particularly in pro cycling, when, you know, the calendar isn't dictated to your own hormonal fluctuations. So, you know, like you could wake up race day, and every race that I've ever been at, we've had a daily weigh-in, which, you know, was told for hydration, etc. But it can like fuck with your head, because if you got a mountain stage and you weigh in 2 kilos heavier, which we know is water weight, it's still weight you have to drag up the mountain. Yeah. And so therefore, like it's hard to battle, particularly if you are a heavier rider, it's hard to battle the thought of like, oh, maybe the night before this mountain stage I probably won't fuel, when it's actually, you should do the exact opposite.
It's almost like that the problem here, though, isn't like we know the knowledge of that it could be water weight and you have to get it up the hill, etc.
Yeah.
It seems like the problem here is actually the weighing in part. Like, let's remove that. At least let's remove it from the eyesight of the athlete to help. Because if you're like another mental battle in such a tense environment already, like that's just something you wish that you could just.
Yeah, I mean, it got to a point where like I had to weigh in every day for a long period of time. And it used to cook me so much that I ended up just filling the scale and sending it to whoever needed to know, because I didn't need to see it.
Yeah. That's just ridiculous.
It's and this is where like we talk about like the difference between disorder eating and eating disorders. It's a spectrum, and it sort of can change, but a lot of people have these disordered thoughts and beliefs and practices, especially in terms of like restriction. And I think the thing that makes me sad is that like I also work, because I work with the pro athletes, I work with amateurs, but I also have women who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s who are still fearful around food. And I've told this story before a couple of times, but when I was back in Australia a couple of years ago, I was working in the hospital, and there was a lady she was 92 and she was sick in hospital, and she was like, I've lost some weight, this is really, really good, I need to lose weight. And it just made me really sad that this so deeply ingrained diet culture that you could be in your 90s and still trying to shrink yourself and still being like attaching your worth and your value to a number. And that's what I see a lot of time with women, men as well, but then especially with women, is that there's this, if I'm smaller, I'm going to be better, I'm going to be more lovable, I'm going to be more valuable, and this worth attached to a number in the scale, which ultimately doesn't do that. Like, it's, your number doesn't determine your value, whether you're heavier, you're lighter, you're small. And ultimately also it's with body composition, each person's body composition is unique to them. And I've had riders tell me they've been on a training camp in December, and some coaches said like, oh, you're a kilo heavier than that rider, comparing them to other riders in December camp, which firstly, they've just come off the back of
it's usually a party.
Yeah, it's like back of off season.
Unless you're an Aussie, it's usually pretty relaxed.
Yeah, it shouldn't. Firstly, not the time to never compare yourself. Should be comparing yourself to another rider, but also having known those riders, I'm like, this person has nothing to. They are the leanest person I've ever measured in skin folds. They're leaner than the leanest man I've ever measured. They have no body fat, but there's so much fear around food and terrified about gaining weight. And this is where it comes into the compassion and having to tread so lightly, because I can see the train wreck before it's coming, and trying to encourage them and trying to reassure them, and they're so terrified of gaining weight and about adding 5 grams of carbs an hour into training. And this is where it's exhausting for me as well, because I've got to spend so much energy trying, from the psychological perspective, trying to reassure them and build confidence in them. And that's why I find the meal plans that are just blanket 500,000 calories more fails, because they don't do it unless they're being force-fed or watched, and that leads to more eating disorders and disordered eating habits and practices. Yeah,
because I've spoken about this with a few former athletes, former pros, and the thing that we lose is, I think I mentioned the word before, is our intuition. When you are a pro, it's like you are told what to do all the time when it comes to training, when it comes to nutrition, when it comes to sleep, recovery, massage, kit, gear. Like you are molded into what the team wants you to be, and you are told what to do and how to, and like how high to jump and all this stuff. So then unpicking that and like trying to give some ownership back to the athlete, particularly around food, is wholly difficult, and it's something that takes retired athletes. I mean, I'm better now, but I've battled with it for a long time, even through my rowing career. It's something that, like, you know, you're constantly thinking about, because we've grown up in this culture of food is a risk to get fat.
Yeah, and that's where I think, I mean, the framework that I use with people is like just simplifying. It doesn't need to be that complicated, but like there's this certain amount of energy that we need to survive and thrive. And often people are eating less than that because, say, like with your BMR, and yeah, we can use a DEXA to get that. And I'll see
Can we, the DEXA. 12... DEX is like what's that stand for?
It's like a full densimetry. Oh, I can't remember.
It's basically like
a full body X-ray essentially.
Yeah, and it gets your bone density.
Your bone mass, bone density. It can measure your fat mass, your muscle mass, like true body composition essentially. But it also can be manipulated, because like if you're dehydrated, you're hydrated, that changes all the numbers. But it also can give a clear estimate of your BMR, like your basal metabolic rate, like the bare minimum. The way I like to describe it is like the bare minimum that your body needs to function. And this is where I see a lot of people on these like 1200, 1400, 1600 calories. Like I've not met a woman that wasn't perhaps like 4 foot, like very, very extremely sort of petite, that had a BMR that was less than about 1500 sort of calories. So from the bare minimums, like I would be looking at adding at least 10% on top of that survival amount, because if you eat less than that amount that you need, like something shuts down. And I think this is where we're leading into sort of REDs. We don't see those things instantly. We see them a couple of months, a couple of years later. And I've seen women who have been in these extreme deficits lose, in their 20s, lose 400 grams of muscle mass, 400 grams of bone mass within a 12-month period, when we've been comparing there. And that, for me, is raising like big warning signs. Like you've got the bone density of a 70-year-old in your 20s because of how you're fueling your body, but because then they have this like, oh, but I'm fine, I'm performing well, I'm okay, it doesn't matter, it doesn't. Like, no, it does matter. Like it's something that's going to quite quickly impact your performance soon.
I think the realization that takes a lot of people a lot of time to get to is that this is like performance on the bike, performance in a triathlon, performance as a runner, performance as an athlete in whatever pursuit is such a, depending on the sport, I mean, equestrian, curling, they can do it forever, but seemingly. But at the professional level, your time in that sport at that level is exceedingly finite.
Yeah.
But you are so narrow-minded into like, I need to perform tomorrow, I need to perform next month, I need to perform in the next 3 months. It takes a whack in the face that is so monumental, it's going to whack you on your butt, to make you realize like you've got 50, 60 years after this with this body. Like you need to keep investing in it now. And
absolutely.
When I had made that realization, the guilt I felt was stifling, because my body had given me so much over almost 2 decades of professional sport, taking me all over the world into sporting pursuits. I met fabulous people along the way. However, I had just abused it essentially. I'd been the abuser in this relationship, and it was asking for help. And I think it takes a lot for someone to realize that. But once they do realize that, then the healing can start.
Gemma,
Absolutely.
Can I, off the back of that, like I've spoken to Georgie and we've spoken to a couple of other people with their experience of REDs and their kind of warning signs and what got them, like lack of a better term, when they were at rock bottom, and those warning signs. What are, like, if you see it before people realize, or you see it when they realize, like what's the most common like warning sign, I guess, for you for REDs in particular?
I mean, obviously the most obvious one with women is period irregularities. So it could be absent period, or it could be just sort of scatty sort of periods. That's the most like highly visible, prevalent sort of one that unfortunately still gets normalized as a good thing for some people. But I think what I'll see is a lot of times people like, oh, but like I'm a normal weight, or I've got too much body fat. Like that can't be okay. And another one I'll see often is high cholesterol levels. So this
I had that
a bit. It sounds counterintuitive because typically if you look at their food diary, they're eating no fat. And this is research that's come out of eating disorders and anorexia and situations where, because essentially what happens is cholesterol in the body, it's a hormone, and there's not many ways to get out of the body. And so if we have a lacking hormones, so whether it's the thyroid hormones or whatever sort of hormones that they are, they're the transporters around the body. If we aren't eating enough energy for our health, for that baseline I was talking about, things shut down, our hormones shut down, muscle recovery shuts down. Our body will do whatever it can to preserve, just keeping us alive. So obviously brain, heart, lungs, that's the priority. Everything else becomes lower on the list of priorities. So menstruation, reproductive health, like, okay, that's lower on the list. And obviously it's still possible to reproduce malnourished, and this is the reality of a lot happens is when people are underfueling is their bodies are malnourished a lot of time, and that can be jarring, that can be shocking but if you're not meeting enough energy for your demands, then your body is being deprived, and that has sort of consequences. And so the menstruation, the irregularities, but I think a lot of people will brush it off because they're like, oh, but I'm a normal weight, or I've got too much body fat, or I've got body fat to lose, but that's not relevant to me. And I'm like, well, no, it's very common to gain body fat in a deficit, even if on theory, on paper, then you're eating enough, or as a protective mechanism, hormonally, your body will store that extra body fat. And so I'll see cholesterol levels rising, and the fix is the opposite of what people expect. Usually people, like, they say it's getting higher. Okay, I've got to eat less. Like, no, you've got to eat more, but it's more when it matters, and it's the more in the training, because often I'll see people on paper, in theory, they're eating enough, but it's the distribution throughout the day. It's like being deprived in training, and then it's being eaten up as catch-up calories or saved for later, or justifying poor sort of food choices, or like, oh, but like I want to eat that cookie, but I'm like, eat it on the bike, like that's great ride food, but it's that misalignment of timing in endurance sport especially just wreaks havoc with the body. So yeah, cholesterol levels is something that I'll see being very high, and that baffles a lot of and I think the challenge is often people have had a blood test done by a general GP, and then the general advice given is like, oh, you need to stop eating fat, you need to stop and it actually almost further creates more restriction, when the answer is the opposite of eating more at the right time.
And can I ask, like, so I put my hand up here, I have the Implanon in my arm. I don't get a period at all. And I mean, I love that. I have a child. So, and it was the main reason why I got the Implanon in my arm. But for example, if you had an athlete that either was on contraception pill to control their cycle for race calendars or whatever, or the Implanon for the same reason, like, how are you, like, if that's not like, what other warning sign would you have? Like, what does it take for someone to go to get a blood test to go, you've got high cholesterol, like, oh, we can't measure your period, but like bone density is fucked.
Yeah,
like,
I think the things that I would be looking for in general would be like coping of training load, for example, and getting sick regularly. So like the average female athlete who is in, I guess, a red state or low energy availability sort of state typically ends up having to take a month off a year of here and there, in like about 22 to 24 days a year of sick days off training because of poor recovery. And so I'll see people not coping with, like, so with my pro riders, like my pro riders are doing like 20-30 hours of training a week, and they do that training out, and then they get sick the week after when their training load goes back down, or they're just constantly on off. So their training is very, very scatty and inconsistent. From a subjective sort of things that I'll see people is like mood just like plummeting, and concentration and energy, and like from an emotional perspective, like just being more snappy or more just energy.
Georgie's like, do all these boxes.
It's just like, God help the world, now I've got my energy back, because my quips are all time.
Yeah. And so I mean, I talk a lot about like performance, not just for the bike, but performance and fueling for life. with people. And because so much of the time people are like not feeling their training very well, and they get back from training and that's it, they're done, they've got nothing left to give. And so I've had riders who I've worked with, and we start getting to feel their sort of training more, and they're like, I can go out for a walk with my boyfriend, or they've got energy to go and see their family and to spend time with their grandparents, because when they've fueled their training, versus in the past where like they're like, yep, don't even talk to me, like I've got nothing, I'm so sort of cooked. Those sort of energy things, they're very, very common. The fatigue, the mood swings, the sugar sort of cravings, like I think particularly mood, fatigue, and irritability is one thing.
Yeah, I think when you've got like a close loved one saying like you're not yourself, or you don't have enough energy to even do the grocery shopping.
Okay.
Yeah, because I mean, in Girona, it's like you got to walk everywhere, and so like you got to walk to the shops, and so like that, getting yourself off the couch to do that after a big day of training, if that's like a chore and really difficult.
Yeah, and
And I
I
guess
think
that's
it's interesting that the
easier
walking thing.
Sorry, Gemma, I cut you off.
No, I was going to say, like, I think that, like, yeah, in Girona, when I was living in Girona, I was doing 15 to 20,000 steps a day, just going to and from like the office and the shop and everything. But I think it's almost been like normalized in cycling of like you cycle and then you don't move for the rest of the day, and that's it. That's all you do in terms of the pro sort of peloton, where I'm like, well, it doesn't have to be like that. And if you fuel your training well, and this is where I think I see so many people underestimating just how much energy they're expending and how much they may need to fuel the training load they're doing.
Yeah.
And I guess that's like both of those things are very measurable in the amateur realm as well as the professional realm. So like you saying, you can't get off the couch to go do the grocery shopping. Likewise, like if you're a parent or you have like family to visit or your partners, not being able to move or want
and I see
to do
with
anything.
like the amateurs that I work with, who, I mean, most of them typical full-time jobs, they're training before work and they're going straight to work, not having eaten on the bike, not having eaten, like skip breakfast afterwards, and they're just going from coffee to coffee to coffee and just like scatty brains, foggy brains, not concentrated. Like a lot of it is the cost of underfueled training. And so when people are like, oh, it's fine, I'm like, is it though? Like, are you really getting away with it, or is it costing you some way, whether it's your social life, it's your professional life, it's your emotional life, aside from the health perspective?
Yeah. And in terms of like how you've seen this, like you said, over the last 12 months, you've really seen a shift. How much, like what specifically has changed, and what do you see change, like that needs to change kind of in the next 12 months?
I think I've been seeing more athletes talk about their experiences and talk about their mistakes and share that. And then, like, as I've been saying, like, I can list it off the top of my head, and Georgie is like, yep, that's me. Yep, that's me. Yep. And people will be like, are you in my brain? Are you in my kitchen? I'm like, I know what's going on. And but I think a big part of why I started, for me, doing the podcast and doing interviews with people is like, I want to help people change that and shift that. And like one of the things I noticed when I did my doctorate research was that with a race nutrition plan, for example, a lot of people were severely underfueling in a race situation when performance matters the most. I'm like, why would you not? But I also noticed a pattern that it would took 3 to 5 years of making mistakes and just like winging it and guessing it for people to kind of figure out like, yeah, I think that's okay, that kind of works. So I'm like, we could, like, if you fueled it so much, but like we can really make that happen a lot less and make the mistakes intentionally in training so that you get clear of like what does and doesn't sort of work for you. And I think that was part of why I wanted to share stories, but because there's so much fear around it, people and worry, people don't want to often share their experience or share like, this cost me. And that's a phrase I'll hear a lot. You sort of touched on it before, Georgie, about how my career could have been so different if I'd known this 5-10 years ago, like, and the shame, the fear, the regret, the guilt of like my life could have been different. And yeah, like it's learning to like forgive yourself and to be like, okay, that's happened, but like, what can I do now to change my future? To improve where I am now.
I think one of the struggles, I was actually talking about this last night, is like holding yourself gently as a high performance athlete is exceedingly difficult. I'm still struggling with it as a retired athlete. And so when you do have this realization and like, oh, my career could have been so different, or my life could have been so different, or I could have got that job or done better at that job if I had the cognitive like energy to be able to think critically in that place. Like, I'm not just talking about professional athletes here, I'm talking about everyone who possibly could deal with RED-S. But holding yourself with that gentle self-compassion is very difficult. And I think that's where your role comes in hugely, Gemma, is that you remind them that it is like these thoughts are normal and they are okay, and just to sit with them as they come through.
Absolutely. Like, that's what I was talking about. A lot of the work I do is psychological, with people, of like reassuring people and reminding them, and touching base, like with the female riders that I work with. Like, there's periods of time that I might see them every week, and there's periods of time that I might not see them for 6 months, depending on what's going on in their world and how much support and just reassurance and reminder of like, okay, like, let's bring it back to like, how well you feel when you train a 20-hour week, eating 80, 90, 100 grams an hour, like, and you don't get sick, and then you've got time to be with your partner and all this other stuff. Whereas, like, remember 2 years ago when you did that 20-hour training week and then you had to take 3 weeks off afterwards to recover because you got sick, and then your power went down. And I think this is where it comes down to, there's a lot of associations about performance is appearance attached, whereas appearance and body weight, body size, body shape doesn't guarantee your equal performance.
And that's something that I definitely battled with, is like a bigger rider in the peloton, coming from like a heavyweight rowing background. You're naturally carrying more muscle, like you are, and you in the peloton you look bigger, and so then it might be subconsciously, but then people start to look at that and be like, oh, maybe it was never really it was like a nebulous goal of just lose weight. Like, it wasn't, it was almost like implanted upon. I see a lot of coaches or DSs being this blanket, everyone needs to lose 2 kilos. I'm like, well, not necessarily. And what is that going to mean for that particular athlete? Like I said, like, I've had an athlete who was being told, oh, you need to lose a kilo, or you're a kilo heavier than that person. I'm like, I've done your skin folds. Like, I know you have nothing to, like, okay, so what are we going to do? Chop your arm off? Like, are we going to lose a kilo of muscle? Like, that's going to, like, what you're going to lose. I think that's going to have a performance impact. We're talking with a sports doctor later in a future episode, and one of the things we're talking about with her is duty of care that she has to her athletes. And I would love to discuss that with you now, as a sport dietitian, with you have to your athletes, particularly those athletes that aren't allowed to tell their teams that they're working with you. How do you balance that?
Or don't want to tell them.
Or don't want to.
It's really challenging, because I work independently, and I've worked in teams in the past, and I've intentionally chosen not to continue working with teams with roles, because for my own personal mental health, because there's so much, you're fighting so much of these battles of people who aren't experienced or educated in this arena, who just like, just tell them to eat less, give them a meal plan, and like, I'm like, no, I can't do that. Where I want to advocate for the athlete, what's right for the athlete themselves as an individual. And so there's been athletes and riders who I've worked with, and then they're like, oh, actually, no, I'm just going to go with what the team was. And unfortunately, sometimes I have seen, and I'm like, I know the person that they're working with, I know that person also has issues with eating disorders themselves, or they've got fears around food that could then be projected onto that sort of athlete. And there's times that has then resulted in the athlete getting sick or having to time off athlete. It's hard then for me, because I can't force them to continue working with me, and trying to sort of support them. But from a duty of care sort of perspective is, I'm there for the athlete 100%. And so then for me, if they choose to work with me, then it's because they trust me. And for me, that's why I don't share who I've been working with, or I don't post unless they've tagged me in something, then I'll share it. And that, from a business promotion marketing perspective, people are like, oh but this person's working with this person. And I think when it comes to the disorder eating, because there's so much fear and shame around it, people don't want to make that public. And so it can be difficult to do that, but it's very, very common, and it takes a long time to sort of work through or heal or recover from. It's not just like, okay, cool, you're fixed, off you go.
No, there's so many things to unpack. Like, trust is a big one, because like, you get told as an athlete that that everyone is in your corner, but
As long as you work for my team, as long as like you're in my team, and then but the second you move to that team or I move to this team, then I'm not in your corner anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Or until you step out of line, not in your corner anymore. Like I think it's there's a lot of you got to toe the party line. So as a independent, I think is an extremely important word in your advertisement, because I mean I have an independent coach. And that's extremely important to me when I was pro, and he's still my coach now, because you want to trust that the person who you're handing over this integral part of your health to has your best interest at heart, separate from a bottom line.
Yeah. And I think also the fact that, Gemma, you said there that like the social media aspect of it being encompassed in the duty of care is also very important. The fact that you have, like you say, like, you could probably promote all of these pros that you work with, and people would be signing up left, right and center. They'd be like, holy shit, I could be as good as X, Y and Z if like I go see Gemma. So that, like, you're taking a hit there, but that's the right thing to do to build the trust for those people, that the clients that come and speak to you, and like lay it all out on the table, like you said, Georgie. So on that, I have a question of, like, if you could tell like all of the teams one thing, what would it be?
All the teams one thing. I think it would be about the importance of the timing of the fueling and adequate fueling around, like the before, the during, after. There's definitely been a big shift in improvement in that in some teams, but not all teams. And so I think there's so many teams that nutrition is just put on the bottom of the list of like, okay, less is more, or they're focusing on the wrong things, perhaps in the right way, but I think and this is where I talk about like everyday nutrition, train nutrition, and race nutrition isn't everyday nutrition. Race nutrition isn't always healthy. But also the everyday person isn't burning 7,000 calories in training a day. So to fuel that appropriately, it's the way we have to fuel that. It's very, very intentional, and it can be quite challenging. And so I think as I said, like I've seen a big shift, like from 5-6 years ago. I mean, it's taken 5-6 years. So most teams now pretty much have at least one nutritionist or dietitian on the team. But I also see a lot of them not necessarily being very qualified, or maybe more from a sports science sort of background rather than a dietetic sort of background. And that's where I see challenges more in the terms of like, this is your perfect number for you, and the calculator says B, so you eat B, and then you don't need any more. Whereas nutrition is an art and a science, and it's not as clear cut.
Yeah, and that's a big one. I think it's a lot of teams head down that path. Jose would say he's more sports science focused in this regard.
So we butted heads. He's the numbers person. I'm the psychological, like the qualitative data. Like that's where we always butted heads, because like he's like, this is the perfect number. I'm like, is it though? Yeah,
because and also we've got to consider the fact that like, if particularly when you're working with females, be it the pro peloton or amateur level, like the vast majority, 94% of the sports science research is done on men. Yeah, so that's a consideration.
Yeah, and so I mean that in itself is an interesting sort of concept, because this is where I see people focusing on the wrong thing. Because or taking stuff out of context and be like, you need to fuel for your cycle, you need to, and like the more there is more emerging sort of research, and there was an event I was at recently, and the new research is showing that like the testing is so negligible, the differences between the phases. So we can test, like, doesn't matter what area that you test. It's individual for that person, but
you're talking about like if they were to be a pool of 50 people in a research study, the differences in their cycles for that research study would be so negligible it wouldn't impact the end result.
Yeah, well, yes, and so, but in terms of if you, like, I mean, so a thing I'll say is like, we need specific recommendations for women for carbohydrate. And I remember doing a deep dive down the rabbit warren that while I was doing my doctorate, because people are like, but we need to, for carb loading, for example, but women, we don't, like, it doesn't work for us. And so, okay, let's go and look at the research and the quality of the research. And like, okay, well, what happened in those studies where the women, it didn't work for them? Like, okay, well, they were using percentage of energy. Okay, well, women typically have 1,000 calories less energy overall. So what happens if you reduce the total amount, the percentage goes around, and they just gave them, when they're basing carbohydrate recommendations on percentages, they gave them 6 grams of carbs per kilogram, and we know like that's a normal amount of food. So like, of course you're not. Whereas when they started giving them 8, 10, 12, ding ding ding, it's actually having an impact. And so this is where quality of research is really important. But I'll see women focusing on like, oh, I've got to fuel around my training, I've got to fuel around my cycle and stuff, that like it's the sprinkles, the 1%ers, but the 1%ers that make such a like clinically irrelevant in 99% of the time. So like what is more important and is going to make a bigger impact is actually eating enough to stay alive and stay healthy and functioning, and then fueling your training. And that is the area that so many women are missing. They're not eating enough for general health, they're not eating enough carbohydrate for general health, and there's that fear around food, and then they're not fueling the training, and as a result it's creating all that backlog of dramas and issues for them.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, like that whole concept around like training to the menstrual cycle. And I think we need more research in it just to prove that, you know, they kind of qualify. Like I interviewed Loretta Hanson for another project, and who is a professional rider for Little Trek. She's from the great region of Mount Macedon here in Victoria, and she was saying like, look, it may be no difference that I have to fuel across the cycle, but I just want to know for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you sort of mentioned before about how like as a rider you have no control about when you're racing. And I think there was this conference that I was at recently, they were talking about how we may never get any clear conclusions with women because we are constantly changing. Like we're never, even like the same person, we are changing within a year. Like I know women that will have, normally they're fine, and then they'll have this one random, like appalling period, like menstruation sort of week of the year where like they just all these cramps that they don't normally sort of get. And what this study that was at this event presented talking about recently was how there may be kind of 3 separate groups of women in terms of the non-responders who like, I don't know what everyone's talking about. Like, this is just not a thing. Like, this doesn't affect me. And then there's a group, and this is where perception doesn't equal reality as well. So a lot of people, they might feel appalling and feel rubbish and get their best numbers and win, break road records. And so there's the group of women that doesn't make a difference. I don't know what everyone's talking about. There's a group of women that the week that their period comes, like that's it feels hard, everything feels sort of sluggish. And then there's a group of women who it's around ovulation, where that's the week that they feel weird. And this is where it comes to ultimately coming back to knowing you and your body as a woman. So like there's a pyramid of things to focus on. Like, okay, the menstrual tracking side of things, it's valuable just to understand your patterns of like weight, for example. Like I did this a couple of years ago where I weighed myself for a couple of months to see like what is happening, what's my patterns, and there'll be a week where you're like, why do I feel so like big or like fat or fluffy? That's a word I'm hearing a lot recently. It's like I feel fluffy and like, oh, nothing's fitting me. And like, you know your own body, and especially with athletes who are very, very lean, you feel the difference of half a kilo a kilogram. Things fitting, and then a week later you like feel super, super lean. Like knowing those patterns for yourself, how those fluctuations, and I recommend women track some of this stuff to see like how, like subjectively, how does it make you feel? But just because it doesn't always translate to numbers.
No.
It's understanding those patterns. Like you might feel like, why this particular week of the month, like I've got no motivation, I'm more fatigued, and being aware of that. And this is where then nutrition as a support tool around that is important. But often the problem is that they're not fueling enough or training with enough fuel.
I mean, we all have I usually have a manic day. Like there's 1 or 2 days in my cycle where I'm just absolutely manic, and it was Monday, Tuesday this week. Yeah. So, but like, you know, you track that, you're aware of that, you know, it's coming at some point. And then when it arrives, it's like, I feel like a mad person, but I know why.
At least that's the thing, like you can measure it if you know yourself. It's about everything, right? Yeah. It's knowing that this week I don't feel energetic because this is the point of my cycle, or it could be, oh my gosh, like this is so uncommon for me. What's going on? Do I need to look at something different? Let's make note of this. And, I think like super important that everyone knows themselves to a level that they can compare to themselves, because we are all so different.
And I mean, obviously, I know there's some people that love data, love numbers.
Oh, yeah.
And they're like, I'm not a numbers person. Like for me, like I'm like, yeah, it's a starting point. But from a ovulation, menstruation, body composition side of things, I mean, I've had an aura ring for I think 4 or 5 years now, and this is one that I found for women. I think actually is quite a valuable tool, because we can see patterns.
You know why they've also, the past 12 months, have invested heavily in adjunct features for women's health specifically.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's good to know. But I think this is something you're talking about, the contraceptive side of things earlier. And I was using it, like I had an IUD at one point of time, and I was tracking before and after that, and I noticed like I would see the patterns in terms of like temperature, and these are like they're minute, they're like half a degree difference, but I could see the patterns and I could basically predict when my period would come, like with and without sort of contraception. And what was interesting with an IUD was that the pattern was identical, because it would obviously be different with taking like the pill or taking that sort of type of contraception. But what was interesting with the IUD was that it wasn't changing hormonally what was going on, and so maybe not getting a proper period as such, but still able to predict when would be ovulation, when would be the normal bleed happening.
Interesting. I feel like there is just so much that we don't know. But I think the approach that you take to everything you do, Gemma, is human first, and humans are exceptionally variable. And so that compassionate care piece is integral to your practice. So I really am grateful for what you've told us here today. I think it's a wholly useful discussion. I just want to ask if you had anything else you wanted to mention before we wrap it up that we haven't talked about that you think would be useful for any listeners.
I think that the main thing that I would just be wanting to highlight and stress, as like if women took nothing else from this, was how important for your health, your performance, for like a whole host of things, that the fueling, the training is, and that food isn't the enemy. Food is good for you, and then if you're an athlete, if you're exercising for fun, for enjoyment, you're probably going to need to eat a lot more than a normal person, and that's okay. And to experiment and to test, but really the timing around training, like, and adding more to the training, that is the most important thing that you can do for your health, for your performance in so many different arenas.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and and breaking everything down. I myself like so much clarity. Everything. I'm still shocked and appalled, which amazes me to hear about Georgie's story, and I'm sure there's multiple out there that are identical. But yeah, to mirror what Georgie said, thank you for holding such compassion for athletes and treating them like humans first. Yes, I'll also note that if anyone wants to book in with you, we can put a link to your website, and of course there'll be resources in the show notes to support anyone with eating disorders or mental health struggles or disordered eating.
Yeah. And Gemma, like if they wanted to follow you on Instagram, because you're quite active on Instagram, where can they find you?
Yeah, Dr. Gemma Sampson. So that on Instagram and YouTube. So then put videos and tips and tricks and stuff on both of those platforms.
Perfect. We'll link you there and tag you in the Instagram posts. And obviously, if this episode has hit home for you, please share it with a mate on your own platforms. Leave us a review. 5 stars, please, only.
5 stars. We only take 5 stars, like an Uber driver.
That's it. And until next time, remember, performance is only part of the picture. So be kind to yourself. Bye.
Ciao.
Bye.